Hey guys, it's Jay here. In this lesson that you're about to watch, I'm going to take you through the OET speaking in a lot of detail so you can really understand what it is the examiners are going to be listening for when you do your test, okay? So in short, what I'm going to do is look at the criteria, the checklist that the examiners use when they're marking you. And more specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the clinical communication skills. So not the linguistic, not the language aspect, but the bedside manner, the soft skills that you will also be scored on. Enjoy. Cool. I think we're ready to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Jay. I'm one of the expert OET teachers here at E2 Language. Thank you for joining me from my apartment today. As I just mentioned, Melbourne is in stage 4 lockdown, so I can't actually deliver live classes from my office as per usual. Anyway, in today's masterclass, we're going to look at OET speaking in some depth. Okay, really in some depth. In fact, before I even start doing that, I'm going to ask you how many people have been to this section of the OET website where you go to test information, speaking, right? Oh, now my computer's not going to load. And looked at this particular page, and not just this particular page, but right down the bottom here, there is a checklist and glossary. Can you just put into the chat yes or no if you've seen this and looked carefully at it? In other words, it's this page here. How many of you have read this official criteria page? Yes or no? No, 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 no. Yes, yes. No, 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 no. That's all right. I didn't think you had. That looks like 98% of people have not read this, of course. Somebody read it, but not thoroughly. That's okay. That's okay. So what this is a breakdown of the criteria. So basically what happens is you go in, you do your role play on test day, okay? You do 2 role plays and they record your role play on a little recording thing. Boom, they send it back to, I believe that gets marked in Melbourne, Australia. And the OET examiners, so you're not examined during your role play, they're just actors, okay? That's just somebody you're talking to. The examiners, like a week later, will then press play, listen to your role play, and they'll be marking your role play according to these criteria: intelligibility, fluency, appropriateness of language, also the clinical communication, okay, relationship building, understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot going on here, right? That's how you get your score, according to this. This and this alone is what is responsible for your score. So we need to understand all of this in order for us to make sure that we get a high score. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation. That's what we're going to do. So in short, you're scored on two broad categories. You're scored on your language skills and you're scored on your clinical skills. So let's look at language skills first. Language skills are your intelligibility. That is how clearly you speak, how easily understood you are. Really, this is referring to your pronunciation, but it also refers to other elements of pronunciation, including word stress, sentence stress, connected speech, intonation, rhythm, etc. Okay, so all of these parts go into intelligibility. Next, fluency. That is how easily, how can I say this? How much do you hesitate when you're going to speak? Or do the words naturally flow, and can you create nice sentences easily, and you're not stopping and starting and stammering, etc. It's not about pace. It's not about speaking quickly. It's about speaking smoothly. You're also scored on appropriateness. That is, the sorts of phrases and vocabulary you use are appropriate to the particular context. And of course, grammar, okay? So plural nouns, verb tenses, articles, formulation of questions, stuff like that. They're the language skills. And you're scored out of 6 for each of these. So intelligibility, you'll get a score out of 6. Fluency, a score out of 6, etc. Now, you're also scored on your clinical skills. This is a really different dimension. This really doesn't have much to do with language. This really has a lot to do with your profession. How can I say? You'll get it as we go through. Stuff like this. You're scored on relationship building, understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective, providing structure within your role play, information gathering, information giving. And for each of these, you're scored out of 3. Now, each of these, A, B, C, D, and E, all have sub-criteria, okay? So let's have a look at relationship building as an example. Okay, so that's the first one. Relationship building is the first one of these. It has sub-criteria including starting the conversation, being attentive, being non-judgmental, and showing empathy. What we're going to do in today's lesson is we're really going to go through each of these. We're going to go through the main criteria here and all the little sub-criteria. And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going through this document here. It's going to be a little bit boring, but it's critical for you to understand all of this. I don't expect you to memorize all of this. I just want you to sit back and relax. You can take notes if you want. It'll be a bit more like a lecture than a lesson. But just try to understand what I'm saying, and then maybe take some notes. That might be a good thing to do. Okay. So let's start with relationship building. As I mentioned, it refers to starting the conversations, initiating the role play, being attentive during the role play, being non-judgmental, and showing empathy. So let's look first at starting the conversation. So this means initiating the interview or the consultation appropriately, which helps to establish a rapport. It builds a relationship and a supportive environment. Initiating the conversation involves several things: greeting the patient, introducing yourself, clarifying the patient's name, and clarifying your role in their care. Okay, the nature of the interview can be explained and, if necessary, negotiated. What that really means is this: when you begin your role play, you'll say, "Hi, Mrs. Smith, my name is Dr. J. Thanks for coming to see me today. Now, I understand that you're having some issues with your medications. Is that right?" So I've started the role play. I've introduced myself. I've greeted the patient. What else did I have to do? I've clarified. I can clarify the patient's name. I can say, "Can I call you Mrs. Smith? Is that okay?" And she'll say, "Yes, that's fine." And then I'll say, "I'm going to be your doctor today." Something like this. Okay, so this is the best way to start the role play. This is really perfect. You do this, you're going to get top score straight away, at least from the first few seconds. Okay. Next, you're going to move to being attentive, but this isn't just something you do at the start. You need to be attentive the entire way through the role play. And as far as I'm concerned, this skill here, attentiveness, really is probably the most critical skill in the role play itself. What it means to be attentive is to listen extremely carefully to the patient. Okay, you're not self-concerned in this role play. And I know on test day you might get nervous, and when we get nervous, we tend to be very self-absorbed. A really good way to deal with nervousness on test day is to go to the other person. Stop thinking about all your shaking and sweating and whatever's going on. Focus on the other person, okay? Be attentive to them. Listen carefully to them. So throughout the interview, demonstrate attentiveness and respect to establish trust with the patient. You need to lay down the foundation for a collaborative relationship and ensure that the patient understands your motivation to help. Examples of such behavior would include attending to the patient's comfort, asking permission and consent to proceed, and being sensitive to potentially embarrassing or distressing matters, okay? So we're not just being sort of rough and forceful or anything like that. We're being very sensitive to the patient here. There's a few interesting parts here. It says something like asking permission. So, for example, let's say you've given the patient some info. Do you mind if I continue on? You're going to continue on anyway, but just very politely you're asking for permission to continue. Or do you mind if I ask you about, or can I ask you about whatever, your smoking habits? Can I ask you? Again, this is sort of asking for permission to being attentive. Cool. So here's an example. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your past medical history? Okay, thank you. This is attentiveness. Non-judgmentalness. That's also part of relationship building. Okay. I should mention before we begin that the way that OET created this criteria and how you are assessed as part of your exam was, I guess it's called like best practice in medical consulting. So the way they developed the entire scoring system and the criteria was I think they did a lot of research into, the most modern best practice, the best practice for consultations. And then they sort of, from that best practice, then they created the scoring system around that. So by doing this, you actually be doing a lot of professional development. You can think about it like that when you actually are in your clinic or whatever. Apparently this is very good. So you need to accept the patient's perspective and views reassuringly and non-judgmentally without initial rebuttal. That is, you're not going to stop them and go, oh, I don't think it's very good to smoke 25 cigarettes, Mr. Smith. You're actually just going to listen, be non-judgmental to whatever the patient's going through or doing. A judgmental response to a patient's ideas and concerns apparently devalues their contributions. A non-judgmental response would include accepting the patient's perspective and acknowledging the legitimacy of the patient to hold their own views and feelings. So in being non-judgmental, you'd say, okay, I can understand that you might not want to stop taking your medication. I can see that. Okay. I'm not going to judge you for it. I'm not going to say, okay, you should do this or that's not good or anything like that. You need to show empathy. Now this can be, you need to show empathy, but not overdo it and not fake it. There's a certain way that you can show empathy, which is very believable. And there's other ways that you can do it that sounds false. One of my friends is an OET speaking examiner. And so she actually marks OET exams, right? And she says one of the worst things that she hears is nurses saying, oh, that's terrible. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, that's not good. This is a very formulaic, robotic sort of way to show empathy. There's a much more nuanced, better way to do it. So empathy is one of the key skills of building the relationship. Empathy involves the understanding and sensitive appreciation of another person's predicament or feelings and the communication of that understanding back to the patient in a supportive way. Verbal empathy understands and appreciates the patient's emotions or predicament. So for example, you might say, even like, that's not even a word. But that is one way that you can show empathy, okay? Yes, I can see how stopping the medication so suddenly might be a bit scary. You're listening, you're being attentive, and you're reflecting back the concerns that the patient is having there, okay? And you're not just saying, oh, I can understand that. Really, this is coming from being attentive, listening carefully to them, reflecting back what their concerns are. We'll look in a minute about some other ways too. There's some other ways that I'll show you in a second to show empathy. Okay, let's move on to the next part. Next part is incorporating the patient's perspective. So we looked at relationship building, okay? And really a lot of that's done in the first sort of 30 seconds of the role play, okay? You really need to build a trusting relationship there. And also this part here, patient's perspective. It's called understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective. It refers to your ability to explore the patient's concerns and ideas, pick up on patient cues, and relate explanations to patient's concerns. So let's go through each of these. Let's look at how to explore the patient's concerns and ideas. So understanding the patient's perspective is a key component of patient-centered healthcare. Each patient has a unique experience of sickness that includes the feelings, thoughts, concerns, and effect on life that any episode of sickness induces. Patients may either volunteer this spontaneously as direct statements, that is, they're going to say to you, listen, this is really affecting my life, or in response to your questions that you ask them. So exploring the patient's concerns, here's a sample. Doctor might say, am I right in assuming you're a little concerned about stopping your medication? Because perhaps the patient sort of mentioned that or something like that. Okay, so you want to You want to find out what's going on with the patient. And a lot of your role play will be questions, okay? It's a good thing to be asking numerous questions, not just telling the patient what's what, okay? You're going to be finding out. Next one, you need to pick up on patient cues. This is one that people fail to do. Before I read you the thing from OET, let me just give you an example of this. Let's say you're doing the role play and you're talking to the patient about how to administer. There's something like, yeah, last time that didn't work for me. And you continue to tell him how to administer medication. Let me just check that my internet's fine. Is my internet okay? Apparently, I've got a low signal. Can you just type into the chat yes or no? It's a bit laggy, apparently. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can turn some stuff off in the background. What have I got going on here? Bear with me. I'm just going to shut down some programs. I actually don't have the internet at home, so I'm using a wireless thing that I purchased. Hopefully it holds out on me. Let me shut some of these browsers and then it should be okay. I'm sorry this lesson's a bit sort of boring, I guess the thing is, but it's straight from the horse's mouth. It's straight from OET, so it's important that we do it. Okay, hopefully my internet's a bit better now. I just closed a bunch of browsers. Okay, picking up on patient cues. So you're having the role play, you're explaining to the patient about how to administer medication, and he just very briefly says something like, yeah, last time, wasn't that happy with it. And you just keep going and you ignore that little thing that he said. You shouldn't do that. You should stop and make sure that every little concern that the patient has, you pick up on, and you get the patient then to elaborate on that, okay? Whoops. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this lesson. Now, just keep in mind that E2 Language runs live classes twice a day, 7 days a week for OET, and sometimes even more than that, actually. We have a mini mock test that you can take. You can take tutorials with expert teachers. You can submit writing for feedback. And of course, there's practice material on the website. So check out e2language.com. Sorry, I'm going to read this even though it's boring. Patients are generally eager to tell us about their own thoughts and feelings, but often do so indirectly through verbal hints or changes in non-verbal behavior, such as voting. Is the patient might say, you're talking, and the patient says, oh, yeah. Okay, it's not even really language, but the patient's indicating some sort of concern there, and you should pick up on that. You should stop and ask the patient, okay, tell me, is there any concern there? Then the patient will make it more explicit. So picking up these cues is essential for exploring both the biomedical and the patient's perspectives. Some of the techniques for picking up cues would include echoing, that is repeating back what has just been said, and either adding emphasis where appropriate or turning the echoed statement into a question. I'll show you that in a second. Another possibility is more overtly checking out statements or hints. I sense that you're not happy with the explanations you've been given in the past. So the patient says, yeah, I don't know. And you stop and you say, oh, okay, Mr. Smith, you don't seem so sure about this. And then the patient will elaborate. Okay, just be mindful of that. The OET interlocutors, the people you'll speak to on test day, will be trained to drop hints, okay? And you should be ready to pick up on those hints. Next, under this criterion of understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective, you need to relate explanations to the patient's concerns. One of the key reasons for discovering the patient's perspective is to incorporate this into explanations, often in the later aspects of the interview. If the explanation does not address the patient's individual ideas, concerns, and expectations, then recall, understanding, and satisfaction suffer as the patient is worrying about their still unaddressed concerns. Okay, let's put it into some practical example here. Doctor, so there's certainly something we can do about your dizziness, and with regard to your concerns about X. So earlier on in the role play, there were some concerns about administering the medication, okay? So the patient raised some concerns, oh, look, listen, I'm not sure about taking medication in the morning. I have to drive my car and it'll probably affect me, whatever. And you'll do some explanation about that and address that in the moment. Later on, in another task in the role play, you may have to come back and address those concerns again. But I guess the easy way to think about this one is just to make sure that the patient's questions and concerns have been addressed and answered. Next, providing structure. Okay, so this is the third part of the clinical skills. And this is obviously different to relationship building and incorporating the patient's perspective. Here, what we're doing with providing structure in the role play is we want to sequence our interview. We want to make topic changes clear. And we want to organize our explanations. So let's talk first about how we sequence the interview. Cool sequence. I'm just going to check the chat again because I'm getting, oh, sorry. Okay. So I'm just going to go back here because there's a great question from Lydia, which is from this one back here. Sorry. Echoing. Somebody said they're picking up on patient cues. Okay, so this is when the patient goes, yeah. So echoing. Let's say the patient says something like, yeah, I don't know about that. I have to drive to work in the morning. Echoing here would be when you say, okay, so you have some concerns about how the medication might impair your driving. Is that right? That's echoing. So you're picking up what the cue is, you're rephrasing it and asking them if that's what they mean. I hope that makes sense. That's a good question. Sorry if my internet's not very good, but we'll just have to push on. Sequencing the interview. So it's your responsibility to maintain a logical sequence apparent to the patient as the interview unfolds. An ordered approach to organization helps both professional and patient in efficient and accurate data gathering and information giving. This needs to be balanced with the need to be patient-centered and follow the patient's needs. Flexibility and logical sequencing need to be thoughtfully combined. It is more obvious when sequencing is inadequate. The health professional will meander aimlessly or jump around between segments of the interview, making the patient unclear as to the point of specific lines of inquiry. Here's an example of how to sequence an interview. So towards the beginning, after you sort of, you introduce yourself, you establish who you are and what you're doing, clarify the name of the patient, etc. And you say, okay, so I understand you've come to talk to me today about your medication for migraines. Blah, 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 blah. A little bit will go on, you'll gather information. And then what you'll do is to sequence, you say, okay, I understand that. Okay, so first, I'd like to talk to you about 3 ways that we can help you, okay? The first is, okay, this is a great way to structure and sequence, okay? Using numerals like 3 ways to do this, or the main way to do this is blah, 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 blah. The secondary way is to do this, okay? Try to think about this like an essay. You know, when you write an essay and you'll have your firstly, secondly, or subsequently, or after this, you should be doing this. You want to do this with your consultation. You want to sort of break it up. Imagine you're breaking it up into paragraphs, logical parts of the structure. You don't want to just mix it all up. Now, the tasks on the role play card will help you to structure your consultation. And you should, in fact, be using them to help you. So let's imagine that the first task on the role play card says something about explain the reasons why the patient must take the medication. So you would say, okay, Mr. Smith, now, firstly, I need to talk to you about why it's important that you take your medication, okay? And the reason is blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I've just structured that. Let's imagine the second task says something like reassure the patient that the medication will not impair his driving performance. Okay, so you would say that, you would make it clear. So you would remember that people are, the examiner's listening to a recording. So imagine you're speaking to them. You say, okay, now, Mr. Smith, with regard to your concerns about driving, the medication impairing your driving performance, let's talk about that now. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Again, you're sort of structuring the interview there. Okay, make topic changes clear. That's pretty much what I was just talking about. Making topic changes clear is a key skill in enabling patients to understand the structure of the interview by making the organization overt. Not only the health professional, but also the patient needs to understand where the interview is going and why. A signposting is like, okay, next, let's talk about this. Or now that we've spoken about that, let's move on to this. That's signposting. It introduces and draws attention to what we are about to say. For instance, it's helpful to use a signposting statement to introduce a summary. For example, you might say, okay, Mr. Smith, now we've talked about X, Y, and Z. So let me just summarize what I think is the best approach moving forward. Again, I'm going to use that word summarize. Let me summarize. Signposting can also be used to make the progression from one section to another and explain the rationale for the next section. Here's an example. Now that we've discussed the possible side effects of the medication, Mr. Smith, I'd next like to talk about blah, blah, blah. So topic changes, pretty clear. And really, when we're thinking about overall structure, really topic changes here are providing that structure. Yeah, cool. We'll do one more and then we might actually stop for a little Q&A. But here's the last part of providing structure. You need to organize your explanations. And this is tricky. This is tricky. So organizing your explanations. A variety of skills help to organize explanations in a way that leads particularly to increased patient recall and understanding. And that's the name of the game. The patient should be able to fully understand you and also recall what you've told them, right? They should be able to leave your clinic and go, ah, yes, I understand what I need to do and why I need to do it. There's different ways to do this. There's categorization, in which the health professional informs the patient about which categories of information are to be provided. What the hell does that mean? Let me think about that. The health professional informs the patient about which categories of information are to be provided. Let's see if my little example next answers that one. Labeling, in which important points are explicitly labeled by the health professional. And chunking, in which information is delivered in chunks with clear gaps in between sections before proceeding, repetition, and summary of important points. Okay. Organizing explanations. Let's imagine that you needed to explain something, and this is often one of the tasks that you'll need to do on the role play card is explain, let's say, how to administer the medication, okay? So what you then need to do is you're about to, imagine, give a paragraph to the patient, and you need to organize that paragraph like you would in an essay, okay? Like in an essay, you would have a topic sentence where you would say, okay, let's talk about how to administer the medication. There's your overall categorization. Then you want to label the important points here. So you'd say, okay, first thing that you need to do when you wake up in the morning is this. With chunking, what you need to do there is you're not just going to give all of the information. You're going to give part of the information and pause and let the patient understand it. The patient hopefully will provide you with some indication that he does understand or not, in which case you will then need to repeat it. And just make sure really what you're doing here is making your explanations as clear as possible. okay? So especially with chunking, you don't want to just keep going if that patient hasn't understood what you've said. And you may need to repeat what you've said or summarize the important points again. That's really complicated stuff. I recommend with this stuff here, let me just show you. I'm going to go back to the official website here. I'm going to show you where you will be able to read this for yourself, because I don't feel like I explained that part particularly well. So on the official website at occupationalenglish-test.org, if you go to test information, go down to speaking. If you go down to the bottom here, you'll see checklist and glossary. And if you click that, it will bring up all of this and you can have a closer read. Okay, so here's an example, a concrete example. So just to recap what we've discussed, we talked about X, pause, and it's really important to remember that, blah, 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 pause. And also here, a really good thing to do, which we'll get to in a second to talk about, is to clarify that the patient has understood what you're talking about. Do you understand what I've just said, or we'll get to that in a second? Okay, let's stop here because there's a lot of information, and let's do a little Q&A. If you have any questions, pop them into the chat. Okay, so Leo's got a question here, which is, whilst greeting a known patient in the GP surgery, should we say our role as well, which is strange? Or it's better just to start with, for instance, how are you? What can I do for you today? Good question. So when you get your role play card, you're going to have a setting, which will say hospital or clinic or emergency room, etc. You're going to also have a scenario. And the scenario provides you with some background information about the patient and what's wrong with the patient and your particular role. Now, you may actually know this patient. It may say something like, this patient has been under your care for the past 3 weeks. In that case, it would be strange to greet the patient and say, hello, my name is Dr. J, what's your name? In that case, you can say, hello, Mr. Smith, nice to see you again. How's your back feeling? Whatever. So it's not, that's not critical to your score. If you screw that up, it's not a big issue, but it's a nice way. It's good to start correctly and get that right. Mohammed, what's the timeline for all of this? How many minutes? Well, you do 2 5-minute role plays. So there's a lot going on there, isn't there? Like with all of this stuff that I've been talking about. Now, some of it just won't happen in the 5 minutes. For example, maybe picking up on the patient's cue, that just won't actually arise. And so in that case, they won't actually mark you on it. So they can only mark you on things that actually happen in the role play. But let's say, for example, the patient does drop a hint, says something about, oh yeah, I'm not sure about that, and you proceed and ignore him, then you will be penalized for that. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Okay. Atif, what are the possible topics? So the topics of the role play will be common medical issues. There'll be things, first of all, they're going to be profession specific. So nurses get nursing ones, doctors get doctor ones, dentists get dentist ones, etc. So there's that. They're also going to be quite common medical issues. Now, if you have any, it's important to understand that you're not marked on your medical knowledge. So if you say something that is medically incorrect, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter. The other thing that you should keep in mind is with regard to the preparation time, you get 2 or 3 minutes to prepare. You can ask the interlocutor, the person you'll be doing the role play with, any question you like. For example, you might say, excuse me, what should I call you in this role play? And they'll say, oh, you can call me Jay. And you say, okay, no problem. You can also ask them how to pronounce specific words. So feel free to ask the interlocutor anything about your role play card. Prakash, Jay, of all the criteria that you're showing us, which part is most important? Well, they're all marked out of 3 points. So information giving, information gathering, incorporating the patient's perspective and understanding. These are all worth 3 points. So they're all important. Now, of course, the language skills are worth more points. So your intelligibility, your grammar, your appropriateness, your fluency, these are worth more points. But I guess it's important to get as many points as possible from these clinical skills, okay? Berlin, when we explain something to the patient, do we have to follow what the role play card said, or can we elaborate ourselves according to our knowledge? You'll need to elaborate using your own knowledge, and you'll really need to perform here. If you just use the tasks in the role play card, you'll finish too quickly, okay? You get 5 minutes, and the role play should come to a natural end within 5 minutes if you're elaborating sufficiently. If you just sort of say the task and then move on to the next task, move on to the next task, you're going to finish much too quickly. Really, what you need to do, I'll give you an example. I did a practice one the other day just to make sure that I still knew what I was doing here with one of the E2 language teachers. And I finished in 3 minutes, and it was far too quick. And the reason is I didn't ask enough questions. I needed to really start to elaborate. And I mean, the thing is with me, I don't have medical knowledge, so it's a bit more difficult. But for you, when you're practicing, get to know how long 5 minutes feels and how many questions you need to ask, and stretch it out. You do need to stretch it out. Pooja, I normally speak slowly. Will my slow speaking be regarded as pauses? There's a difference between speaking slowly and hesitating. Speaking slowly and clearly is a very good idea, okay? You certainly, remember, somebody's going to be listening to an audio recording of your role play. So if you're speaking really rapidly, blah, 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 that's not good. You should be speaking very clearly. And one of the things you need to be mindful of is when you get nervous, you probably, like me, if I get nervous, I speak really quickly. A lot of people do. You need to slow down and to really articulate yourself as clearly as possible. Now, if you're hesitating, that's a problem. That means if you can't formulate your sentences, you can't find the right vocabulary, etc., that's a different story. Princess, Jay, is it an issue if we run out of time? Like if we get stopped at 5 minutes? No, that's not an issue. If the interlocutor says, okay, 5 minutes is up, that's not a problem. It's not an issue if you finish at about 4 minutes. It would be an issue if you finish within 2 minutes or something like that, because there's just not enough, there's not enough opportunities for you to show all of your clinical skills here. And this is what you should be thinking about doing. And what I'm showing you here about, pausing, echoing, making sure the patient understands, this all adds time to your role play. And really what it's doing is it's showing off your skills here. So if you do study and prepare and memorize some of these techniques here, and you actually purposely put them in, like you're conscious of them on test day and you're doing them, that's going to boost your score. Okay, so Langyal's got a question here, which is, how do I use the tasks on the role play? Well, you need to paraphrase the tasks. Let's say, for example, the first task says, reassure the patient that his medication, it will be sufficient, okay? You don't want to just say, Mr. Smith, I can reassure you that your medication will be sufficient. Okay, that's not enough. You want to say, so Mr. Smith, tell me about your medication. How have you been feeling about that, whatever? Do you think that it's been enough for you? Remember, you can turn these things into questions. You're creating a conversation from the little tasks. Okay, a few more questions and then we'll continue on. Abu Zid, can I use the pen to arrange my thoughts during the 5 minutes role play? Yep, you can write on the role play card during the 2 or 3 minutes if you want. I wouldn't take notes or write things during the role play because it's so important that you're listening to that patient and responding appropriately to the patient. If you're writing something down and not paying attention to them and you miss something, that's not good. Osama, what's the best way to prepare for speaking? I really think that doing mock exams with feedback is the best. So the mini mock test on E2 language, the speaking intensive on E2 language, or the tutorials on E2 language, you know, that's the best because you get to do the role plays, you get to experience all of this, and the teacher's going to give you feedback on whether you're doing it well or what you missed out on, etc. So last question. Ali Raza, do we have to pass both criteria, the language and the clinical, in order to clear the exam? Yes. You need to get, on average, for the language skills, intelligibility, fluency, appropriateness, and grammar, they were marked out of 6. You need to get, on average, 5 out of 6. This is to score a B. You need to get, on average, 5 out of 6 for the language part. And then for the clinical communication part, you need to get on average 2 out of 3 in order to get a B score. Okay, so yes, it's important. Okay, hold on to your questions. I'll continue on. We're nearly done. Okay, next criterion is called information gathering. Okay, so we've done relationship building, we've looked at patient's perspective, we've looked at providing structure. This one's called information gathering. So this refers to your ability to minimize interruption, ask open questions and then close questions, avoiding compound questions, clarifying what the patient said, and summarizing. So let's go through each of these. First, we'll talk about minimizing interruption. So listening to the patient's narrative, particularly at the beginning of an interview, enables the health professional to more efficiently discover the story, hear the patient's perspective, appear supportive and interested, and pick up cues to the patient's feelings. Interruption of the narrative has the opposite effect, and in particular generally leads to a predominantly biomedical history omitting the patient's perspective. Observable skills of active listening techniques include the use of silence and pausing. So let me just stop here. Particularly at the beginning of the role play, when you say, okay, now Mr. Smith, it's good to see you again. Now, as I understand, you've been having some issues with your medication. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Okay, you've just opened it right up here. Now, the patient's then going to speak for some time about the scenario, about what's been happening. And here you really want to minimize interruption. You want to let the patient speak. How do we let the patient speak? A, you are quiet, you are silent, you listen, okay? And pausing. Also verbal encouragement when you go, I see, right. Okay, that makes sense, yeah. Oh, I see, okay. So you're encouraging the patient to continue. And by using these little words like these are signaling that you're paying attention and being attentive. Also, here's echoing again. Echoing and repetition, such as Mr. Smith says, yeah, and the medication, you know, it feels like I get a bit of chest pain. And then you go, oh, chest pain. This is echoing what Mr. Smith has said. Or Mr. Smith says, you know, at work, it just feels like, you know, I'm not coping. It's just feels really overwhelming at the moment. And you say, okay, so you're not coping. And Mr. Smith continues on. So you're not interrupting him. You're just encouraging to continue. And then you've got D here, paraphrasing and interpretation, such as, are you thinking that when John gets even more ill, you won't be strong enough to nurse him at your home by yourself? So here we're doing some sort of interpretation. We're saying, for example, you might say, okay, so Mr. Smith, you think that by continuing your medication, this might actually impede your ability to drive your car to work. Is that right? So we're paraphrasing, interpreting what he said. We're not interrupting, we're helping him explain. Okay, this is interesting. This is called open question versus closed question. Just quickly before I give you the OET official material, open question is when you ask a question that elicits an answer that is not yes or no. For example, if you say, Mr. Smith, how are you feeling? That is not a yes or no question. So Mr. Smith will start to speak. Open questions get people to talk in sentences, which is good. Closed question is when you say, okay, so have you been feeling sick? Yes, I've been feeling sick. It doesn't allow Mr. Smith to talk. It actually closes the sentence off. But what's good is starting with open questions. So Mr. Smith, tell me about how you've been feeling. Blah, 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 blah. And then you move to, okay, so you've been having some headaches. Yes. Okay, so open and then to close. This is I'm not even going to read that. You can read that. Or you can go to the official website and read that. It'll certainly put you to sleep tonight if you want to sleep deeply. So here's some examples. So doctor says, so tell me about your medication use. Open question. It's going to get the patient to talk. Patient says, blah, 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 blah. Doctor says, okay, so you feel like you've been over-medicating. Patient says, yes. Open question, closed question. This is a good strategy, okay? What you should do though is not just go open, close. You should go open, 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 close. So really you're trying to find out, and then with closing it, you're confirming, okay? Think about it like that. Okay, you need to avoid compound questions. So a compound question is when more than one question is asked without allowing time to answer. It confuses the patient about what information is wanted and introduces uncertainty about which of the questions asked the eventual reply relates to. Here's an example. Have you ever had chest pain or felt short of breath? Okay, this is called a compound question. I've just asked two questions at once. So the patient's going to think, which one of those am I going to answer? And you want to avoid that. Ask single questions. Get your answers single questions. A leading question includes an assumption in the question, which makes it more difficult for the respondent. Let me explain this. Here's a leading question. You've lost weight, Mr. Smith, haven't you? I haven't asked Mr. Smith whether he's lost weight. I've assumed that he has. And so I'm not asking him openly. I'm sort of leading, it's called a leading question. Or the next one here, example is, you haven't had any ankle swelling? No. It's an assumption in that. I want to make them nice and open and say, have you had any ankle swelling? Okay, so no leading questions. Here's a bad compound question. Doctor says, so you're worried about taking too much medication and the possible side effects? Try to avoid that. Okay, clarifying statements which are vague or need further amplification. The OET language is crazy. I don't know why they write like this. What the hell does that mean? Is a vital information gathering skill. After an initial response to an open-ended question, health professionals may need to prompt patients for more precision, clarity, or completeness. Often, patients' statements can have two or more possible meanings. It is important to ascertain which one is intended. For example, sorry, I missed what you said there about nervousness. Can you please repeat that? Okay, so you just want to clarify statements that you're unsure about. Or maybe it's the patient's fault. It will be the patient's fault. The patient hasn't clearly given you an answer. Therefore, just get the patient to clarify. That's fine. That's not an indication of you having poor listening skills. It's an indication of you paying close attention and not getting a clear enough answer from your patient. Next, summarize. Summarizing is the deliberate step of making an explicit verbal summary to the patient of the information gathered so far, and is one of the most important of all information gathering skills. Used periodically throughout the interview, it helps with two significant tasks: ensuring accuracy and facilitating the patient's further responses. So let's say you're talking to Mr. Smith and you've just asked him about how he feels about taking medications in the morning. Then you want to summarize what he's just said. So this summary doesn't come just at the end of the role play. You want to summarize like after each section. You say, okay, so let me see if I've got this right, Mr. Smith. Now, you believe that taking medication in the morning is not going to be a good thing for you. Blah, 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 blah. Is that right? And then he'll say, yes, that's right. Or he'll say, no, that's not right. That what I meant was da, da, da. Okay, so you want to punctuate your role play with summaries. It's important for this, and it's also important for your attentiveness skills. Again, it's showing that you're paying close attention to the patient. Okay, last one. Here we go. Information giving. So this, we've done relationship building, patient's perspective, providing structure, information gathering, and information giving. So broadly, this refers to your ability to establish what the patient already knows, pause when giving information, encourage the patient to share thoughts, check whether the patient has understood, and ask what else you can do. Let's just go back. Here we've got information gathering. Okay, this is what really at the beginning of the role play, you'll be largely just gathering information, asking a lot of questions, okay? And then towards the end of the role play, you'll move on to more explanations and providing reassurance or providing information. So information giving, okay? Gathering and then giving. So establish what the patient already knows. One key interactive approach to giving information to the patient involves assessing their prior knowledge. This allows you to determine at what level to pitch information, how much and what information the patient needs, and the degree to which your view of the problem differs from that of the patient. For example, so Mr. Smith, now, before I just tell you about the side effects of the medication, are you aware of the side effects of the medication? I'm asking the patient if he already knows about this. And he might say, yes, to some degree, I understand that it's going to make me drowsy and blah, 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 blah. And I can say, yes, that's right. It will make you drowsy, blah, blah, blah. And I'll elaborate. I'm not just going to tell the patient in case the patient already knows what's going on. Next, pause when giving information. This approach, often called chunking, we've already talked about this, but let's go through it again. Chunking and checking is a vital skill throughout the information giving phase of the interview. Here, the health professional gives information in small pieces, pausing and checking for understanding before proceeding, and being guided by the patient's reactions to see what information is required next. This technique is a vital component of assessing the patient's overall information needs. If you give information in small chunks and give the patient ample opportunity to contribute, they will respond with clear signals about both the amount and type of information they still require. For example, so first, Mr. Smith, what you need to do is this, okay? And just pause, and Mr. Smith will go, all right, yep, okay, I've got it. Or Mr. Smith will say, but what happens if I do this? Okay, so you allow that pausing for some sort of, for him to confirm that he understands or for him to ask a further question. After that, you should do this, okay? Then you need to do this, okay? And you're listening for Mr. Smith. Encourage the patient to share thoughts. A further element of effective information giving is providing opportunities to the patient to ask questions, seek clarification, or express doubts. Just before I go on, sometimes in the role play, not even sometimes, very often in the role play, there'll be some sort of almost like an altercation. Like you'll be trying to, you won't see this on the person's role play card, but the person you're speaking to, your role play will say something like, reassure Mr. Smith that taking medication in the morning is fine. On the other person's role play card, it will say, refuse to take medication in the morning because you think it will make you crash your car. Okay, so there's going to be some sort of altercation there where I'm going to say, no, Mr. Smith, in fact, it's, it's actually fine if you take, as long as you take the correct amount of medication, driving your car will actually be fine. He'll say, no, I've heard from my friend that, he crashed his car, he took it, blah, blah, blah. So what you need to do here is encourage the patient to share thoughts. So, or ask questions or seek clarification or express his doubts. Health professionals must be very explicit here. Many patients are reluctant to express what is on the tip of their tongue and are extremely hesitant to ask the doctor questions. Unless positively invited to do so, they may leave the consultation with their questions unanswered and are a reduced understanding and commitment to plans. So let's say Mr. Smith says, you say, taking the medication, it will be fine as long as you take the correct dosage, Mr. Smith. And he says, no, you know, I've got some real concerns about this. My friend once crashed his car. You say, okay, so please tell me about these concerns and do you have any further questions about this? Allow him or invite him to clear his doubts there if there's some sort of altercation that happens. Or just ask him, so what do you think about that? Second last one, check whether the patient has understood. Checking the patient has understood the information given is an important step in ensuring accuracy of information transfer. This can be done by asking, does that make sense? Although many patients will say yes, even though they are still unsure, because they don't want to admit that they didn't understand. A more effective method is to use patient restatement, asking the patient to repeat back to the doctor what has been discussed to ensure that their understanding is the same. So you might say, so is that clear, Mr. Smith? Can I just ask you to repeat how much medication you should take every morning? And Mr. Smith will say, yes, that's clear. You said that I should take 15 milligrams. I say, yes, that's right. It's quite interesting doing that, but I guess that will definitely clarify if the patient's understood. Last one, here we go. Ask what else you can do. This is a great way to finish your role play. And just on that, what you want to do, if you finish the final task of the role play and there's still time, we talked about giving summaries throughout the role play, like summarizing what you've just said about the particular task, which is great. At the end, what you can do is an overall summary. Okay, so you finish the last task and you know you still have time, you might say, okay, Mr. Smith, what I want to do now is just summarize what we've spoken about today in this consultation. So you came to me with some concerns about your medications. Now I've explained to you that blah, 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 as long as you stick to the correct dosage, et cetera, and just do a nice little summary. To finish it all off, you can ask the patient what else you can do. So deliberately asking the patient what other information would be helpful enables the health professional to directly discover areas to address which blah, 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 blah. Is there anything else I can help you with? And then the patient will say, no, that's fine. I say, okay, thank you very much. That will end the role play. Holy moly, that's a lot of information to remember. I think the good thing about this is you probably already know how to do this because it's what you do in your medical practices anyway. I guess what the point of this lesson was to make it explicit to you. And I think what you need to do before test day is probably just read that document that I showed you, or you can view this video again, which will go up onto the website. I don't think there's any real way to, cram this before test day. This really is stuff that you just want to make, I think, just to refresh your memory before test day. I think what we've spoken about, though, it is important to try to implement it in the role plays, okay? So, stopping, pausing, clarifications, all these things, they will get you points, okay? Even if some of them feel a little bit unnatural, because maybe in your cultural context, this is not how you do a clinical consultation, okay? That's probably true. In many countries around the world, this is not considered best practice, okay? This is considered best practice for the Western world, where you'll be going to practice your medicine. But so if it does feel unnatural or strange, or, to ask, for example, asking the patient what he already knows about the side effects of the medication, maybe that's something that you don't usually do it in the OET speaking, because it will get you points. Cool. Let's see if I can answer some of these questions. Can we ask 2 or more questions from the patient at the same time? No, because that's called a compound question. We talked about that. So you want to make sure you're asking 1 question at a time, then getting the response, confirming or clarifying before moving on to the next question. Don't say, Mr. Smith, can you tell me about your side effects, how much medication you're taking, and have you had any issues with this? It's too much. It's overwhelming for the patient. They'll go, what? Too much. Hani, in the speaking lessons, could you provide us with the patient's role play card? When you go into the website and you click on speaking, you'll have access to both. You'll have access to the nursing or doctor role play card and the patient role play card. What you should do is have a look at both of them. It's very helpful because you'll see how they actually align with each other. Because the task for the doctor, for example, might be to the first task for the patient might be to complain about this. And the first task for the doctor will be to explain about this. And then the next task for the patient will be to like complain and reassure and explain and ask. Basically, the tasks interrelate with each other really nicely. So you can be sure that what the interlocutor has relates very nicely to what's going on your role play card. Although you can't see it, you can assume that everything that's going on there, when you have to reassure, for example, you can assume that they're going to express some sort of complaint, and then you're going to have to reassure them. And so you can sort of be clever with that. For example, let's say your task coming up says, reassure the patient that blah, 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 blah. Now, you might prompt the patient to speak. You might say something like, now, Mr. Smith, do you have any concerns about what I've just told you? And then he'll say, yeah, I'm worried about this. And then you can reassure him. So you can sort of use it to your benefit. Rissi, am I going to lose marks in speaking if I don't finish all the tasks in the 5 minutes? It's not necessarily. The tasks are given and the role plays are constructed in a way that it will allow you to give examples of what we've just spoken about, okay? So if you do go through all of the tasks and reassure and explain, it's going to cover all of the clinical criteria that we just looked at. So if you're spending too long on like the first 3 tasks, then there's 2 more, you may not be able to show examples of your clinical skills, and that will actually lose your points. Well, yes, yeah. So anyway, practice within the 5 minutes. Just try and finish all the tasks in the 5 minutes. Pooja, can you share a few examples on how to show empathy? Well, empathy, as I discussed, is not just saying, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Empathy can be expressed in many different ways. It can actually be expressed really through being attentive and listening carefully and going, I see, I see. I see, yes, I can, okay, I could see why that could be a problem. Please tell me more about that. Asking questions, getting them to express more, confirming, it's called back channeling. Back channeling is when, chest pains, okay, yeah, headaches, I understand. This is a great way to show empathy. And it's also will get you points for attentiveness as well. Jay, when will the second mini mock test be ready on E2 language? Unfortunately, we've run into a problem, which is we can't record the audio for it because we're all in lockdown. So I hope in the next 2 weeks, but sorry about that. It's a bit of a pain, this lockdown thing. Mohammed, how can I get the document of this lesson? Ooh, that's a good idea. I suggest that you look at the document. Let me go back. Let me go back one more time to the official website because you can download the document there. Okay, so if you go to this website here, occupationalenglishtest.org, test information, go down to speaking, And then it's this checklist and glossary here. Everything that I've just shown you came from this, or all those big chunks of text came from this PDF. Okay, so this is something, you know, maybe a week before test day, you want to have a read through this. It's got all that information in there. I just made it a bit more reader friendly. This video will go into the website as well, by the way, if you want to watch it again. I don't know if you do. Between, is it okay to formulate the name for the patient? Then we forget to ask doesn't matter. Just the name of the patient doesn't matter. Okay, you can give the patient a name, or in the 3 minutes preparation time, just say, what can I call you? Or you can just say, you can actually tell the interlocutor what you will call them. You say, oh, do you mind if I call you Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith? And they'll say, yep, that's fine. And then when the role play starts, you'll say, hello, Mr. Smith. That's fine. So the name, it doesn't matter if you screw up the name, just give the person a name. Or ask them, what do you want me to call you? And they'll say, call me Jane. Say, okay, Jane, that's fine. Minnie, if the patient was diagnosed asthma, can we say, are you aware of what asthma means? Yeah, I mean, as we talked about, you want to establish what the patient already knows. So probably, yeah, it's probably a bit broad. It might be a little bit too broad. You might be talking about the patient's ventilator, and you might ask them, okay, can you, so I assume that you know how the ventilator works? And the patient will say, yep, I'm supposed to push down on here. You say, yes, that's correct. Leo has got a question there about how to achieve 400 as opposed to 350. You know, when you're trying to get above B and into the A's, it really does depend on the nuance and subtleties, like, you know, not making grammatical errors in your writing at all. You know, punctuation is correct. Things that you can get away with a B. You know, making some errors of articles and whatever, punctuation errors in your writing. But when you're aiming for an A, like a perfect score, or up close to a perfect score, you know, things like pronunciation have to be very clear. You can't have interference from your first language, or your grammar should be very accurate. So it's just a little notch up, but it's not made very clear. There is you can download the criteria, and it will show you the different band scores. Adler, can we use our knowledge to elaborate on the role play card? Yes, you will need to. You will need to. Pooja, can we use the same statement twice? For example, let me explain, or do you follow me, a couple of times. Yeah, you want to show variety. Don't try and, you can use it a couple of times, but don't just say, do you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand? Think of different ways to make that phrase. Okay, is that clear? Or is there anything else I need to explain there, Mr. Smith? You know, different ways, paraphrase, show a variety of vocabulary and phrases. Between, do the interlocutors strictly stick to 5 minutes, or do they sometimes go over 5 minutes? It's strict. They set a timer, and when that time is finished, they will stop you mid-sentence. And that's not a problem if they stop you mid-sentence. Just go, okay, I got to 5 minutes. That's a good thing. Gerhard, what happens if the patient refuses to accept anything? That won't happen. Sometimes, as I mentioned, there'll be some sort of very minor altercation is not the right word. There'll be a sort of a reluctance for the patient to accept something. Like Mr. Smith might go, you know, yeah, look, I'm not so sure. One of my friends took the medication and, you know, he had a car accident. That's when you need to start to ask Mr. Smith more questions, or ask him about his specific issues, etc. But in the role play, the interlocutors are trained to offer a little bit of resistance, but not too much. They're not going to just stop, and it's not going to enter an impasse where you can't continue on. Okay, there'll be some. You'll have to be strategic sometimes with the patient and say, Mr. Smith, I can reassure you that taking the medication doesn't cause this. Now, perhaps your friend was doing something else at the time that may have caused this, or what do you think may have happened there? Whatever. You need to be a little bit. You need to play along, I guess. But no, it won't be too difficult. Abuzid, is there any information on the computer-based OET test? And I'm not sure when that will be available. You'll need to check with the official OET website when that's available. Are there any changes to the OET test? No, none. It hasn't changed. It's still the same. And there will be no changes to it. Bitcoin. Sometimes I hesitate and I cannot formulate good sentences. How can I address this? Yeah, okay, well, this is a language issue. And one of the most critical things in the speaking section is your ability to formulate questions, okay? One of the things where people fall down on is their inability to formulate good questions. Mr. Smith, how long has this been happening? What is that? That's a present perfect continuous question form. So you do need to familiarize yourself with the grammar. What I recommend you do, if you're struggling with your fundamental language skills, I'm just going to share this website with you if it loads because my internet's so slow. Whoops, not that website. This website here. We've built a new website called E2 Language School, or e2school.com. And this website will help you with your fundamental skills like grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. Okay, so what you might want to do is enroll in this grammar course here. It's completely free. It's 100% free, Grammar Review. And in there, you will find all of the verb tenses: present simple, present perfect continuous, past simple, etc. And you will find in there the question, how to create questions there, because that's critical. Because when you're creating a question, really what you're doing is changing the verb form from, what's an example? You take medication. How do you create that into a sentence? Do you take medication? Did you take medication? Are you taking medication? Have you been taking medication? These are all the different verb forms that change the meaning slightly. Anyway, you can review your, brush up in your grammar skills here in this course. That's a good one. Or if you're having pronunciation issues, check out Speaking Lab. This one you have to pay. It's $9 per month, which is pretty cheap. e2school.com. Good question, Hanny. In the speaking mock test, can I see the timer so I know when 5 minutes is up? I don't think so. No, and you're not allowed to wear a watch either, which makes it a bit hard. Jay, in the preparation time of 3 minutes, can I ask questions? Yes, you can. You can ask the interlocutor questions. Holy moly, I made it to the end of the questions. One more. In reassuring the patient, can I say, for example, that most of my patients in my practice have benefited from this medication? Yep, that's one way to do it. Various ways to reassure the patient. Anyway, I think I'm done. I need a cup of tea. Thank you very much for putting up with what it was. I must say, it was a pretty boring lesson. Going through those criteria is not the funnest thing, but certainly very important information to consider, keep in mind, and try to implement in your role play if you want to maximize your scores. People found it okay. That's good. Cool. If you have any more questions, you can email hello@e2language.com. Otherwise, keep preparing, and I'm sure you'll do well in your test. I'll see you soon. Thank you.